Hey boys and girls, I'm Brother Tim with Calvary Baptist Church. Welcome back to another week of Bible study. Don't forget, every Sunday at 1 p.m. you can meet me here. Now, we're going to recap what we talked about last week because we're going to continue our story. We were talking about Joseph and his coat of many colors. And if you remember, we talked about how his brothers were really jealous of him. Joseph had the ability to have these weird dreams. And when he talked about them, it was as if everybody would bow down to him one day, and his brothers got really jealous. So as a result, they one day threw him into a pit and actually found this caravan of people walking by, and they ended up selling him into slavery. And from there, we're going to pick up our story this week. Now that Joseph's been sold into slavery, his brothers now have to cover up the decision that they had made. And remember, kids, when you tell a lie or you do something wrong or you sin against God, you end up having to do another sin just to cover up the sin that you made. And that's what's happened here. So here's Joseph with 11 brothers that he cared about a lot, but yet they sold him into slavery because of jealousy, because of a hatred towards him. And because of that, they sold him into slavery. Now they had to cover up in front of their father. So they took his beautiful coat of many colors that his father had made Joseph, and they soaked it in animal's blood. Now that sounds pretty gross. But what they were doing is telling a lie to Joseph's father, to their father. And this was that Joseph must have been attacked by some fierce, vicious animal. And really what had happened was they sold him into slavery. So remember, kids, do your best to not sin. Do your best to not lie, because you're going to always end up doing it again to cover up the last one. So now Joseph's been sold into slavery. They've tricked the father to think that he has been eaten by an animal. And what ends up happening? The father grieves. He's saddened. His heart pours out. The Bible talks about how he had cried so much that there wasn't anybody that was able to comfort him. Now, Joseph is now in slavery underneath the rule of Potiphar. Now, Joseph's not always going to be a slave, and you want to know why? Because God has big plans for Joseph. While his brothers may have meant it for evil to sell him into slavery, God really meant it for good. So remember that, kids. A lot of times when something happens in life and it may seem like it's terrible, God may have something great come out of that. Just stay close to God and do your best to live for God. And that's what Joseph did. So while he was a slave, he did everything he could in the right way in the sight of God. And you know what? That was noticed by Potiphar. Potiphar ended up putting Joseph in charge of everything that he had. And Joseph had control of things now. Now, Joseph was taking care of the things that Potiphar had put him in charge of. And one day, he was busy about his business. And Potiphar's wife was in the room. Now, Potiphar's wife tried to make accusations towards Joseph and tried to make it sound like he did something bad. And because of that, Joseph fled and he ran away. Now, Potiphar's wife went to Potiphar and she lied about it. She tried to say that to Potiphar that Joseph had done all these wrong things. Now, she lied, of course, and because of this, Potiphar had Joseph put into jail. Now, being in that jail, you'd think, man, that's a terrible thing to happen. But guess what? While he was in the jail, the warden, who's in charge of the jail, had put Joseph in charge of the things of the jail, such as the prisoners. And because of this, God was continuing to use Joseph in great ways. Now, while Joseph was in jail, a cupbearer, or let's say a baker, to Potiphar was also sent to jail. And while he was there, he had these dreams. Now, of course, Joseph being there helped interpret those dreams. Remember those crazy dreams we talked about before that Joseph had? Well, now he's able to interpret the dreams that other people are having. And he let this cupbearer know that one day you're going to get out of this jail. And he says, but let me remind you, tell Potiphar that about me, that I'm here in this jail. Now, the cupbearer ends up getting released. And you know what, kids? He forgot. He doesn't remember the things that Joseph had told him. He doesn't remember what he was supposed to have told Potiphar about Joseph. And 2 years go by before anything else was to happen again. Now, while Joseph was in the jail, a cupbearer to the Pharaoh was sent down to the jail as well. A cupbearer, more like a baker, let's say. And he was down in the jail as well, and he started having these crazy dreams. And Joseph was there to interpret those dreams. Remember all those dreams that Joseph had before? Well, now his ability to interpret is coming to help him. So he tells the guy, listen, your dreams mean that you're going to get out of here one day. He says, but when you do, please don't forget to tell Pharaoh about me. Now, some time had passed, and the cupbearer was let out of the prison, and Joseph remained. But the cupbearer forgot all about it. And 2 years pass, Joseph remains in the prison. But then one day, Pharaoh himself started to have some dreams, and he didn't know how to interpret these dreams. So he asked around if anyone knew anybody that could help him interpret. And the cupbearer, remember him, said, I know a guy, and he's talking about Joseph down in the prison. And he tells him about how he interpreted his dreams and how they came true. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph to come up, and he asks him about these dreams. And Joseph said, I can interpret for you if God be my help for it. And he tells him, Pharaoh, God is giving you a warning. He tells Pharaoh about the fact that there's going to be many years of good blessings coming about. But then immediately after, there's going to be a lot of years of famine on his people. That means a lot of starvation and hungry people. So he has some time to get ready and get prepared for this bad event to happen. Now, as a result of the dreams that were interpreted by Joseph, Pharaoh went ahead and put him in charge of everything over the land when it came to the goods and the grains and the food for the people. So, after the years of plenty had passed, Joseph did exactly what he was supposed to do. He put aside food and he put aside grains. He put aside the things that the people would need, so that way when the famine came, he was there to be able to hand it out to the people. And during that time, when the famine was there and people were starving and in need of food, they started making their way to Pharaoh's temple. And while they were there, that's when Joseph would divvy out and provide people the nourishment that they needed. Now, the interesting thing was, one day it was Joseph's very own brothers who came before him to be able to get food for the family. Now, it's been almost 10 years since Joseph was sold into slavery, and his brothers didn't even recognize him. But you know what's interesting, kids? The brothers, when they came to the temple to be able to get the food from Pharaoh's storage, they bowed before Joseph. Now, if you remember the dreams that Joseph had in our study last week, he had dreams of about all these bales of wheat and grain that were leaning and bowing towards him while his stood upright. And his brothers were jealous over that and angry, remember? Because what was Joseph to think that people would bow before him? And here they are, in God's provision, God's foresight, God's blessings coming through and promises coming through. Joseph's own brothers now are bowing before him. But think about it. Had Joseph never been sold into slavery, he wouldn't have been there to be able to provide for his own family the way God had intended and planned all along. Now, the meetings with his brothers took place on more than one occasion because they needed food. Now, after a couple of times, Joseph couldn't hold it in anymore, and he revealed who he was to his brothers, that it was him, their brother, the one that they sold into slavery. Now, you know what? Their brothers were immediately afraid. And you want to know why? Because of all the sin that they had committed in trying to sell their brother into slavery, thinking of killing him at one point. They were afraid of what Joseph was going to do to them. But you know what Joseph did? He did exactly what God wanted him to do. He showed the love of God in his own life. He didn't get angry at his brothers. He didn't bring up the past. He had forgiven them and put that behind him. He was happy to see his brothers, and he was glad to recognize that God had put him in a position to be able to help his brothers. And as the story continues to unfold, his father, his brothers, everybody ends up moving to the land of Egypt, where they were able to get the nourishment that they had needed, all because Joseph was exactly where God wanted him to be. Now, kids, that's a pretty awesome story. When you really think about it, it started out pretty scary. Joseph was being sold into slavery. Joseph was losing his family. Joseph was in a strange land. But God meant it for good. God was preparing Joseph. God was getting him ready because down the road, he knew his family was going to be in need, as well as a lot of other people. And Joseph was just the right man for the job. That's a great story. Now listen, I look forward to next week. 1 p.m. Don't forget, tune in on YouTube, tune in on our Facebook channel for the church, Calvary Baptist Church in Middleburg, and you, myself, we'll get together and we'll have another Bible study. Thanks again, and I hope you all have a great week.